Hey guys, I know it's been a while since the last time you saw me. I had to take a little break because I was sick, but now I'm back and I'm ready for an episode that a lot of people have been asking about, and that is cap embroidery, specifically on the EM1010. Now, even if you don't have an EM1010, don't worry, stick around. I'm going to give you guys general practical tips that you can use on any machine. And before we get started, like always, please make sure to like and subscribe. You guys have been doing such a great job at supporting this channel that we actually just passed the 20,000 subscriber mark, which is super awesome. So thank you guys so much. I love you guys. Please keep the likes and the comments and everything going so that we can keep this channel alive for you guys. All right, so let's talk about caps. Now, why is cap embroidery so scary? The reason why cap embroidery is seen to be a little bit different than flats is because embroidery machines are, somewhat designed to embroider on things that are flat. The reason you might be having problems with caps is because you're treating them the same way as flats, when you really should be approaching cap embroidery just thinking, how can I stabilize this and flatten it as much as possible to mimic a flat? So I'm going to go ahead and talk some basics for the newbies here. Basically, when you're embroidering caps, you can use either cutaway or tearaway backing. Most of the time, it's going to be tearaway. You use tearaway backing on things that you don't wash and wear as frequently, more like if you don't, there's a phrase that's if you don't wear it, tear it. That typically means like accessories, things that you're not wearing on your physical body, even though you do wear your hats on your head. I don't know how accurate that phrase is. Okay.
That's all staying in.
Yeah. The only instance that you will be using cutaway backing on a hat is if you are using a dad hat, an unstructured hat. You know those hats, not like these. These are this one's semi-structured, this one's structured. But typically you would call it structure. Why? Because it has some sort of, it has like a foundation here, structure. Whereas a dad hat is flimsy, it's bendable, so it's very similar to what? A flat. So with your dad hats, you would use cutaway backing because you want to stabilize it really well, especially if you have a detailed design. So our unstructured hats don't typically give us any issues like needle breaks or anything like that. The only issues that it would give you is perhaps loss of registration if you're not stabilizing your hat well. Now in this video, I'm going to go more in depth on structured hats since those are the ones that tend to give people a little bit more issues. For something like this, I would absolutely use an 80-12 sharp point needle. Now, for something like this, which is semi-structured, it's not as tough as this hat. I can probably get away with a 75-11 sharp point. So that is what I'm using right now, simply because I just don't have time to change the needle, but you can use your 75-11 needles on something like this. Pro tip, for the most part, if you want to avoid issues, whenever you're embroidering hats, you can have 2 or 3 of your needles from your machine programmed already for hats. And that way you don't have to be constantly switching out needles. For unstructured hats, these are not tough, so you can use your regular 75-11 needle. You should have no problem with that. So what are the issues that can arise with structured hats and how do we combat them? So most of the time what happens with structured hats is that you get needle breaks and flagging due to loose hooping. So what do we do for needle breaks? For needle breaks, you can weaken the hat with water. You can also apply heat to make it a little bit softer. People have so many different techniques for weakening the hat. You can also use a titanium needle rather than just going up to 80-12. The titanium needles tend to be a little bit tougher. But what I recommend the most is to practice hooping. Hooping is the most important part about cap embroidery, and if you don't get your hooping right, you will continuously run into issues. So for instance, let's say it is hooped too loosely and there's too much space between the cap and the cap ring and the needle plate. You're gonna see a lot of bouncing up and down, which causes needle breaks. That right here is called flagging. So to prevent that, you just have to hoop as tightly as possible, and I'm gonna show you guys how I hoop to make sure that I don't have any issues. So now when we're talking about unstructured hats, one of the main issues that arises is loss of registration. And this is essentially, for those of you who don't know, when the material shifts during the embroidery process because it's not stabilized well enough. And what it causes is for the outline and the fill of the actual design to not match up. So basically your design comes out distorted. So to prevent loss of registration, just like you would on a flat, you would just increase stabilization by doubling or tripling up on backing. So when I say doubling or tripling up on backing for your unstructured hats, I mean Tripling up on tearaway backing, I would not recommend tripling up on cutaway, but you can just, instead of using tearaway, you can just use 1 sheet of cutaway or maybe 2 sheets if the design is extremely complex and you need more stabilization. Something else that you can do to further stabilize is to spray some temporary adhesive spray on your tearaway so that it is married to the cap, and that way when the machine starts to embroider, it doesn't shift around as much. Something else that I want to go over for unstructured hats that I will get into for structured hats as well, is that you want to make sure that there's a nice underlay there. And an underlay is basically something that is done in the digitizing, and it's what's going to help marry the hat and the stabilizer together and just create a nice foundation for the rest of the stitches. It's basically the first stitches that come out. It's going to be like that first layer of stitches. That's going to be your underlay. So now that we're on the topic of digitizing, cap digitizing is really huge to make sure that you don't run into any issues during production. So if you have covered all your bases, you might just be using the wrong design. A lot of beginners use any flat design for their caps, and they are not created equal. So if you're not a digitizer, you have to specify to your digitizer that you are working with caps, and you should tell them the type of cap that they're working with, and most of the time they'll adjust the settings on the software to the denim setting, which is similar to the construction of hats. But that's not all they need to do. There's some other things that they need to do that you need to know. Even if you're not a digitizer, you should know this because you can look out for it in your embroidery when you're seeing how the design performs. So first off, when you're embroidering caps, the design should always begin in the center. So the second it starts stitching, it should stitch in the middle, and it should stitch from the center out and the bottom up always. So we're about to take it over to the embroidery machine to go ahead and hoop, bear with me. But before that, I wanted to address a question that I get asked a lot. What is the maximum height for embroidery? It depends on the hat. It depends on the profile of the hat. So if you guys are new to embroidery or the apparel industry, the profile is just the top part of the hat. So we have hats that are lower profile, and then we have hats that are higher profile. So the lower the profile, the smaller the area of the hat. What I always recommend is to keep at least a ½ an inch from the brim. Anything under that is what I call the needle break zone. So I don't recommend going under that. Now, a lot of people don't really ask about width, but I will give you more or less like a best practice for width. The embroidery machine can embroider ear to ear. So you have this whole area to work with, but a nice safe zone for width is usually like 5 inches to 4.5 inches. So for hooping, you're gonna need your backing. That's tearaway for those of you who missed it. Binder clips, I have 4 of them. This right here is called my cap ring. It's essentially the hoop that I'm going to embroider the cap on. And this right here is called the hoop station. It's where I'm just gonna hoop on. It's just a station for hooping, essentially. And then here we have our cap driver, which is the bracket essentially that connects the cap ring to the machine. Alrighty, so I'm gonna go ahead and bring this over to the embroidery machine. Before I start, I'm just going to unhook the strap. You always want to have the straps open, and I'm just gonna get started by pushing back that sweatband. Really important when you're hooping. So the hooping process begins with latching on your hoop station. It has like a little knob down here to the side of your machine or a sturdy surface. Then I'm gonna go ahead and grab my cap ring. I have a little opening right here that connects to this little tab on the actual hoop station. So pretty self-explanatory there. And I just want to make sure these 3 little latches connect. Once I hear that click, I know it's in there correctly. So now that I have my hoop station on, I'm just going to slide the backing in underneath this little tab right here. And on this tab, there's a little notch that allows you to center. You want to center the middle to this notch, but I tend to shift it just a little bit to the left so that when you do bring this over, it shifts it right in the middle. If you're embroidering with a single head, this is not as important, getting it centered to that tab, because you have the machine and this little center seam to help you. So you can center it manually. But if you're embroidering with a multi-head, you do want to make sure that you're centering really well. So I would get into the habit of hooping it nice and centered to that little notch right there. These little pegs right here, these black pegs right here, are inside of your hat, not on the outside of your hat. Really important. And when you're hooping, I like to bring the bottom of this hat as close as possible to the end. keeping the sweatband underneath all the way through is one of the most important things. Now with the binder clips, I'm just going to pull back on the material a bit. And I'm going to put 2 per little peg here in the back. I'm attaching it to those little pegs. This is just going to help flatten it and stabilize it a little more. You don't want it to be like pulling too much so that it distorts the hat or the design looks weird when you're done, but you want it to pull just tightly enough. So make sure the hat isn't like this, right? This also just helps clip the excess fabric to make sure it stays out of your way during production. So you can just bend it a little bit, nothing crazy, don't damage the hat. Something I forgot to mention when pressing start is you need to bring the speeds down for caps. 500 to 600 stitches per minute is that sweet spot. So the design is ready. I'm gonna go ahead and take it out of the machine, and I gotta tell you guys about a little learning opportunity. He's nice, he's nice. Okay, so the actual embroidery came out nice. There was no loss of registration or anything like that. However, it is not centered where I wanted it. And even though you guys saw me center it on camera, what actually happened was that in the design, the center point was somewhere off of the center. So this was a stock design that I just quickly downloaded for demonstration purposes. I'm sure maybe they did it on purpose. Maybe it's designed to be like on the side of a hat and then you put like a monogram here. That's what I imagine. But now I have a nice idea of like putting a little name here. I think that would look really nice. So I think that's probably why they did it. Don't know why the reason why it's not centered, but anyway, if you do want it centered, just make sure that you're when you're digitizing it, that you ask the digitizer or yourself to have that little crosshatch right there in the center. That way when you line up the needle to the seam, it will perfectly center itself. Gotta take a look at how this looks. Oh, not bad. I enjoy this hat. All right guys, so I hope this was helpful. If you have any other questions about cap embroidery, please leave me a comment below. If you do any of these or if you have any techniques that you want to share, you can also leave me a comment. And don't forget to join our Facebook group, Embroidery and Custom Apparel Mastery. I'm pretty sure that I got this idea to do a hat episode from that group because a lot of people ask about caps. So yeah, highly recommend joining so that you can share your knowledge and ask any questions that you have and be the first to find out about our videos. And if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe and like. We'll see you guys shortly. I'll be back next week and I love you guys. I really do. I don't know why I feel like I should put my hands on my head. It feels baseball cappy.